Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your boy Jamsys, and today we're going to be going into more of an anti-meta pick today in Green Laika. I will have to say as a warning, Green Laika is not a reliable opener unless you have like pretty good speed, I would say. Like, I think if you want to run Green Laika, she needs to be at least 310 speed to be competitive. But otherwise, I think she has a bunch of upsides to offer that I think are worth considering if you to pick her, I mean. Basically today we're going to be spamming Green Laika games, and the games tend to be a bit more cleave-sided just because Green Laika as an opener really needs you to take advantage of her initial turns of like S2 or S3, or else she's just kind of like a worse opener than like all the other ones. And there's a few reasons why she fell off, like the Aiden, Politis, Celine, like the hand trap kind of people like with Remo and stuff that like really cucked her. But I think there's a few workarounds, especially if you don't run Guiding Light on your Laika because she's fast and she can make use of Spatiotemporal Fan. And basically we're going to be using that in the first match. So my opponent first picks Lua, and immediately I don't want to play Standard into that. So I picked Zio and Laika here just to grab turn 1 initiative. My opponent picks Aiden plus ML Yufine, so I decided to pick 2 DPSs that kind of deal with them both, which is Steny and Landy. My opponent continues on to pick A Taiwan, which isn't the best pick because I think Laika's S3 applies the speed down before the sleep. So even if A Taiwan does cleanse 1 debuff, it cleanses the speed down, which is like the less important of the 2 debuffs. And they also pick Eden, and I'm pretty confident in my ability to bust down his team, especially since, as I said, Laika is on Spatiotemporal Fan, so you can run a damage Landy on a damage artifact instead of a Guiding Light, which adds a lot to your DPS potential. I pick F10A because his team's kind of fucked by unbuffables, and I last picked F10A because F10A can also soul burn out of Lua's reset cooldown, though I guess she could get slept or whatever. But it works out because it gets banned, and basically my game plan here is to actually proc the A Taiwan S2 and then land all my debuffs afterwards. And I watched the VOD of this guy playing me because I figured out that he was a really popular content creator named Deity, like obviously it's his name, but he was saying that he was sure that I had a 310 Laika, like sure buddy, your Laika's 310, but my Laika actually is 310 here because I put my fastest speed set on her for fun. And basically we're able to take advantage of it, and since everything is asleep and with immunity, I just want to S1 A Taiwan because there's no point in waking up his entire team if my team hasn't taken a turn yet. But what I fail to realize is that his team is kind of slow, and with decreased speed on the field, all my units are actually able to cut except for like Steny, I guess. But it doesn't matter, we're able to get our Spatiotemporal Fan onto Landy, so she's like pseudo Guiding Light. I was contemplating whether I want to soul burn, but then I couldn't really soul burn it afterwards, so I thought there wasn't really much of a point, especially since we were about to wake up ML Yufine anyway, and I was afraid that this thing was on Alvarez. So we go for the kill onto Eden here. We get a lucky dual attack, but I actually think this hurts me more than it helps me because what I want to do is actually have Zio's S1 proc kill the Eden, and then I would have her like have him up again on the CR bar because he gets a 50% CR push, and then I can use it to kill Lua or something. But it shouldn't matter too much because he can only sleep Zio, and I guess that's fine, but we have Steny plus like a billion books coming up, so that's always a fun and balanced thing we can look forward to. And since we soul burned Laika S3, it's also coming up soonish too. So if we need a turn where we immediately need to put this ML Yufine to sleep, like that is also a very, very possible answer. But we start the soul burn train with Steny here. We only need 2 to kill this ML Yufine, so I thought the game was over, but I soul burned anyway, just because there's like no point holding these souls for Epic 8. But it turns out this is Unholy Sack, so me soul burning there actually really mattered. And to prevent this ML Yufine from actually getting a lifesteal turn in by counterattacking, we actually go for Laika's S3, which is back up due to the cooldown. But this is what I mean by Laika has a few advantages. Okay, these are like a lot of caveats, by the way. if you have good speed, that you outspeed most Luas and Celiuses, and you have a bunch of units that work with Laika, and I'm talking like Green Vildred, Landy, Model Laika, Kisei, and you have Spatiotemporal Fan on, she's actually not a bad anti-meta pick because like Ran and Pera don't really affect Model Laika, especially since you're not on Guiding Light anyway. And she dodges and she can put stuff down. And if they have no immunity setters, she becomes like a really obnoxious unit to deal with because your whole team is really slow. Like circa, like, you know, when Cerisa F10A was a thing and they would lap your team like 90 times, you're doing that except with the green unit, which is fun. So for the second game, like we're gonna continue to pick Laika plus other stuff because it's fun and why not. I actually meant to pick Laika here, but we picked Landy here by mistake. This sends me back to like Golden Boys vibes when Steny plus Landy were like the it girls of the DPS class with Guiding Light and stuff. But I guess Steny is the same meta-wise, but Landy has fallen off a lot in recent times, which kind of sucks. But my opponent decides they don't really want to punish my Steny Landy pick, and I'm like, oh, based, thank you. And one really fun thing about Laika's S2 is that if you have, especially if you have imprints, you can manipulate who gets the S2 and therefore who gets the attack buff and who gets the stealth. And that becomes very important in matches down the line, or I guess it's this match, but it's one of those like, Epic 7 might seem like a simple game. There's a lot of nuances to how you can play Epic 7 to the best of your ability. But my opponent like really does not punish my ability to do anything, and I'm kind of nervous to pick Architect Laika here just because this ML Yufine unit actually kind of messes up Architect Laika from a turn 2 perspective because it's like a Politis but with Elbrus, and you can't ban both Politis and ML Yufine if they come out in the 4-5, which kind of sucks. But I initially did rate ML Yufine as kind of a meme unit, but I actually think there's a lot of merit to ML Yufine nowadays. I will still say she's not like a catch-all unit like, you know, APOC or Celius, but I think she has like a well-defined niche, and if she ever gets buffs, I think she has a real possibility of becoming like really good in the metagame. But my opponent picks Charlotte here, which is in theory a good answer to this Steny plus Landy, but it's a really bad answer to this Opsig and aggression in general. So I opt to pick F10A here just because F10A kind of like destroys this guy's team, and I ban out Mage just in case this Mage is like 300 ER or something. And I'm pretty sure my opponent's forced to ban out F10A, and they are, because F10A into comps that F10A is good into actually just destroys them because like their team cannot handle unbuffables. But this is what I mean about moving around imprints so that I can put the highest attack on the correct character. And in this game, I think I want my Opsig to have the attack buff. So we start the match off, and then we start by S2ing Vivian just because we want to take off her insight stacks, but we still want to give our Opsig Guiding Light plus the attack buff. And now that she has that, we're free to just soul burn it up here because especially after Charlotte gets hit, we're able to have enough buffs to Landy, soul burn S3 back to back. And thankfully, being on a damage artifact, we're actually able to proc the Karina here, which is really important because we really need that barrier to actually be able to cut and kill everything. And since Landy pushed the whole team by 30% and our team was like pretty fast compared to this Karina to begin with, we're able to just obliterate the Charlotte, move on to S3, and obliterate the rest of the team, honestly. Sylvan Sage Vivian has no insight stacks. Escort's gonna kill this Arrowell, but holy sack, you know, anti-strays tech. I get it. And once we S3 this Arrowell, we're actually able to get in a really clean... Oh, I guess this is a cleave setup, honestly. But, you know, MO Laika is a lot more one-dimensional than like Lua per se, because Lua can actually be played in standard kind of. But I think Laika's biggest shortcoming is that she's so inflexible and her skills have a lot of caveats. Like her S3 doesn't strip, so it loses to immunity, but it also can be countered. So like you die to stuff like Aiden all the time, or like Elbrus, and then the S2 is a non-attack skill, which can be 15%ed, so it's not the best either. But I'm just like trying her out just because like, bro, like picking Lua every single game when it's up gets a little boring after a while, you know? And there's a lot of Lua pre-banners still, so why not just take advantage of the kind of like the underestimated tech of Green Laika. But funny story, I was playing like RTA matches this morning because I'm addicted and I have a problem, and someone pre-banned Green Laika into me, and I was just like, oh, okay, buddy. It's just like sometimes the struggle is too real when people pre-ban the only speed unit you have. Feels Gigabad, man. But yeah, I don't know how much longer I'm gonna have Green Laika geared, but I will say that as fun as she is, I think putting her on a 310 like that level gear is a little too much for her. I think she's like a great pocket pick for like a Zeo trapping or whatever. But I think for like general purpose openers, I think you're like much better off to just pick like Celius or Lua or even like Narwhal. But in this match, my opponent sees Green Laika and Zeo, and they're like tanking down really hard. And this is one of the reasons why Green Laika is not that great, because if you are on full immunity, full tank down, there isn't that much Green Laika can do to you, unfortunately. And my opponent goes for exactly that. And so Dark Corvus is like a BIS pick here because the top 4 picks just do no damage, so Dark Corvus will eventually solo, but I need a really good 5th pick, and you can't really pick Arya here because Arya dies to Karina S3 plus LRK S3, and I can't pick Aiden here because that dies to the same thing. So I need to pick an anchor unit that can withstand all of it, and I don't think it would have been ML Yufine. Like, it might have been an ML Yufine pick if I had it, but then ML Yufine had a lot of AoE counterattacks, so maybe that would have died to LRK instead. But anyway, like, I'm kind of forced to pick Model Laika here just because she's like an unconditional damage dealer that is able to ignore ER and soul run into the enemy team, except my opponent makes a really good pick here because Senya, like, our team doesn't really have a great way to deal with Senya, but it's not the worst. But they end up picking Celine, which is like incredibly terrible because they're telegraphing that they're going to ban Dark Corvus. And so now that my win condition is in Model Laika blowing up his team, we're in a little bit of trouble, I'm not going to lie. It's going to be tough because I think I make the especially since the whole team is on an immunity. Like, this is just a really tough game because I think my Stenny dies to an LRK S3 plus a Yufine S3. So as long as LRK gets a turn plus one other AoE, I think my Stenny is dead, which makes me to make this series of plays that happen here. I push back Karina because Karina absolutely cannot be allowed to take a turn. But I think what I should have done in hindsight is that I should have S3'd LRK and then Soulburn Destina and then killed both LRK plus Destina and then try to tank my way through this Yufine plus Destina, or S2 Yufine because she CR pushes and maybe my Stenny could lap around to Soulburn and kill everything. But my opponent's team is a little bit too tanky to rip through, and judging by this Yufine's health, this Yufine is on damage. So this S3 is what hurt us a lot here, and yep, it's crit. And my Stenny takes... oh, okay, 2k damage is not the worst, but it's like definitely gonna die after this Karina S3 plus LRK S3. So I think the play was actually to go for Destina plus LRK maybe, because like we cannot take like all 3 AoEs back to back to back. So like I should have killed Destina and maybe we would have been able to win, but you know, we're still learning. Like, Green Laika is not my opener of choice, and it is usually isn't for most of the season. I'm just like trolling in early season because I'm bored. But yeah, like I know it's a little toxic, but I really wish they would release a new opener just because like the ones we have right now are really, really, really boring. Like Peyra and Ran are kind of bedge. Like I'm tired of seeing Celia's face. Zio, omnipresent threat. He's a bit less popular though now that everyone is running immunity for Emil Rona, but you know the point still stands. One thing I will have to say about the hidden identity in RTA is that this season is actually the season for the what's it called? Cheesers, because since you don't know what builds people are running like by the name, you can actually cheese a lot of people. Like a lot of my people I theory crafted with was like kind of sussy about Spatiotemporal fan on Laika. Like shout out to Synox, by the way, who, you know, like his mind birthed Spatiotemporal fan Laika. But a lot of people don't like running non-guiding light on their rangers just because like of Zio. But now that we have hidden identities in RTA, like most Zios will assume that you are on guiding light on rangers if you pick them into Zio. And so it's like kind of like a mind game where you can kind of like psych out what your opponent's doing, and your opponent is forced to respect it. I think I've said this point a few times before in my other videos, but sometimes just picking a unit confidently really, really alters the, I don't know how do you say, like people's thought processes. Like for example, if you first slam Knockwall in a game, like most people will assume that thing is like 300 plus or like 310, even though its base speed is 115, because the fact that you're so confident and willing to slam that in the first pick position really means that like you have like the speed gear to back it up, and people are forced to respect that, because like if they draft around like that narwhal isn't 300 and it suddenly is 300 and it outspeeds everything, then you're like kind of doomed, you know what I mean? But yeah, in this game my opponent picks like kind of weird, honestly. I just banned Zio because I'm not really threatened by any of his DPSs, and again my Laika is not on guiding light, so I really don't care about this Rimuru at all because he can't use it to cut. And so we take advantage of my opponent not knowing that my Laika is not on guiding light, and we're able to just press S3 freely. We're about to wake them up, sure, but it should be fine because the most important thing to land here is actually the speed down on the units, just so it can prevent lap down the line. And since my opponent like did not have any sort of immunity, we're able to just make the speed down stick. And now that we have speed down on top of speed up, we can actually just lap this guy like indefinitely, which I really like about these Laika comps, because I think speed down is like a really underrated debuff, just because, you know, it's not the most impactful. Like it's not Beguile, it's not skill cooldown reset, but it's very, very devastating because it really messes up the tuning for a lot of units that is really important in very unexpected ways. But we double Landy S3 up here. We just execute the Rimuru. We're kind of in an awkward spot now because we kind of need to kill this Lionheart before it gets an S3 off. Just because, you know, we kind of do. But Landy eats at an APOC S3 and dies. Very understandable. I don't actually want to S2 the Lionheart just yet because it's going to mean that S2 procs Lionheart's passive and grants death buff, which is something I do not want. Or at least not just yet. Like I'll press S2 right before Lionheart's about to die, so we can get like an extra Milim passive point thing. And unfortunately, like I guess the one thing that makes Spatiotemporal fan a little bit worse than Guiding Light is that your rangers will have a bit less longevity due to not being in stealth. But Laika, I think, is okay for this purpose because Laika's... Okay, don't get me wrong. Laika is not bad in the long game, but a lot of Laika's value is front-loaded in the S2 and S3. So as long as she gets those things off before she, like, inevitably dies, like, it's not the worst thing in the world. And now we're playing the game of praying for no dual attacks just because Lionheart, if it crits my Milim, I'm going to be very upset because we're going to lose. So we're just pressing our S1s, like, very gently, trying not to provoke a dual attack from anybody. This Apox on Crimson Seed, which I find very interesting and not being on proof. We get eat another counterattack from Arrowwell, but our game plan is like going pretty well. I think as long as I'm able to just S3 comfortably with Milim with the 2 souls, we should be able to win. I mean, I guess if as long as she doesn't get hit either, like that's another big caveat that I did not think about. But we don't want to soul burn this turn because it's gonna cycle us out of evasion. But of course, we get a fucking dual attack and proc the Lionheart right before she's going to go. So I kind of just press S3 to maybe like cope that I'm going to outspeed this Lionheart, but this Lionheart has speed buff, so I guess I was coping a little bit too hard here. And Lionheart's actually able to go press S3. Luckily our Milim dodges, and my opponent does have souls to try and soul burn it into Milim, but we get another dodge, so very lucky where our Rylet, or like Fire Rylet, actually decides she wants to do her job and not immediately die. But we immediately get dual attack, which is like, whatever. It's something you'd expect at this point. And we get the Wahaha Dragon Buster off here. We're able to kill Lionheart plus SC Arrowwell with the escort damage. And I think one S3 plus S1 should be able to finish the game. But it turns out Milim's the GOAT, and we're able to finish off with one less S3. And that's it. Or is it? Okay, so obviously whenever I make these videos about a new opener, we gotta do, you know, the Jamsys Hood Classic, which is what? You guessed it. Outspeeding Ran Raw Dog with their openers despite being like 9 base speed slower or something. So we're up against this like Cleaver draft, but they kind of like backed out last second into ML Yufine Briar, which I thought was a little weird, but you know, we don't judge here. It turns out it's Colby Alpha and this guy is a well-known cleaver. So this guy used to run, if I am not mistaken, really fast AOL with really fast Ran. But I think my Laika speed RNG'd him, and then since we outsped, we're able to go strip Karina instead of pushing the Ran back, as I would have been most likely forced to do otherwise. Put everything to sleep. ML Laika's useless, or not ML Laika. ML Yufine's useless. Like, this is why ML Yufine needs to be built on immunity. Like, I know she self-cleanses, but immunity for like guaranteed turn 2 units is so important. Anyway, I digress. Ran never loses. Presses S2, S3, but somehow doesn't strip anything. Like, it doesn't even strip the steadier Zio, which is pretty weird, but I guess it's like poetic justice. And the Ran bricks crit too, so like this Ran literally did like big flop energy, literally did nothing, but it's fine. We're able to push up with Bunny Dom here, and we would have like cleansed off any defense break or whatever, so it's not that much of an RNG win. But we go for our first turn, we press S1, we press S2 or S3, and this ML Yufine is dead. And there's no way this Karina can solo DPS this team, especially without death buff. So my opponent decides to tap out here, but I think this was a pretty nice showcase of the power of Green Laika. But yeah, thanks for watching guys, I'll catch you next time.